Hello, everybody. This is Alex with the now Market Zero.
Mm.
Well, it's not the Market Zero show. It'll just be called Market Zero. Today, Dan and I, Daniel,
Hello.
we will be discussing a new show that I have recently expanded into Dan's repertoire or whatever you want to, whatever. Open up the dictionary and use whatever word you want. Uh, it is called Death Note. It is a very popular Japanese cartoon, which are referred to as anime, often based off of. Over here, we would call them comic books, but over there, they call them manga. I don't know. The other side of the world is kind of a wacky place at times.
As is this side of the world.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Recently, just showed it to him as of this recording this weekend, which is July 14th. We've only seen 5 or 6 episodes. There's probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 seasons. I've seen the whole thing, and I liked it, which is the reason why I recommended it to him. Dan, which I'm sure he'll elaborate in his own words, told me that he wasn't necessarily a fan of anime, but this one he seemed to have liked. I liked it because it's got a very deep and meaningful philosophical presence of justice, and it's not like your typical, just not only anime, but typical good guy versus bad guy, where this one guy is the good guy and this other guy is the bad guy. This is two guys within one concept, which is justice in this show, and they're using two different means to achieve justice, so two different means to an end, which is, to me, what makes it so much more of a dynamic show, because it's geared towards one ideology. It's just the different means, which we must not think about that all the time. It's not prevalent in our thought process throughout the day, but we're all essentially trying to achieve a goal, but we're all going through our own means to achieve that goal.
Right. Yeah. Like Alex was saying. To go back on what he was saying once, he was talking about how I told him that I'm really not a fan of anime. It's not. It's just not something that really has ever interested me. But this show. I think the reason why I was never really, excuse me, too interested in anime was because it kind of felt like the same thing. It was the team of good guys versus the team of bad guys, and they would fight, which is essentially how I viewed it. Maybe that's just me viewing it in a bubble, I guess, like in a vacuum, but that's just the way I saw it. Whereas Death Note, from what I've seen so far, it's not the traditional anime that I am used to seeing. It's
like the traditional anime of these guys are just screaming and yelling and doing like power ups and like transforming and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. There is some supernatural, I guess, within the show, but it's not like everybody's doing magic and doing all these special powers to fight each other all the time. It's something of an internal struggle, I guess, within one character, but it's also an outward I guess expansion of his own character upon the rest of the world.
It's almost like his character struggled internally, and then he pushed that struggle externally onto the world, and then it grew. It has grown up to this point that he has seen, and it will continue to grow into the main character, who I personally believe, from my view, is the main villain. The main character of the show is the main villain from my personal standpoint. Based on what I believe in my theory of justice, but it grows from an internal conflict that he has to a conflict of achieving a goal that the two guys want the same goal. That he's competing against a detective that's a world-renowned detective, and he's got all the credentials. He went to Harvard and Yale, and all, he's the most handsome guy,
Small loan of $1 million. For
yeah, exactly. Luxurious and all that stuff. He basically what they're doing is competing with their ideals to achieve justice. And throughout the show, you see a lot, and I really like this. The animators and the story writers did an excellent job of showcasing and visualizing the concept of divinity, and they've got like well, I don't want to say divine, but it's kind of like churchy, kind of like music. You have like people in the background, like a choir almost, and you have the angels. You have, well, the Shinigami in this, or I believe Shinigami is Japanese for God of Death, and of course over here in America we're not gonna say, oh hey, this character in the show is the God of Death. I mean, I don't think that would go well. But that's what that particular character is, and you can see the symbolism for well, there's in the intro they've got the Shinigami reaching out, and the main character, the main villain in my eye, his name's Light. He's reaching out like who is it, God? And
Yeah, the creation of Adam.
yeah, and they're reaching out, and in between them is an apple, because the God of Death loves to eat apples, like, red apples. But yeah, that's between them, and they're almost touching like in the actual thing. Which I love that. That's a very interesting part of the show, that they took the time to put Judeo-Christian symbolism in here, and and he's always calling himself the God of the New World. He's trying to basically recreate what is the world, which I think this came out in 2006 or 7. I think it's pretty old now.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to recreate the world of that time into the world that he wants by using this Death Note, which the Death Note itself, and this is where the anime part comes in. It's got the mystical powers, and anybody's name that gets written in this Death Note dies. If you just write their name, they die within 40 seconds of a heart attack. You can write their name, and you can specifically write out a cause of death. Like, you could say so and so committed suicide. They hung themselves. They drew pentagrams all over the wall, which is what he did in the show. Later, and this isn't really a spoiler for Dan, but at one point he has a woman set herself on fire. So there's a lot of show left to, because we're only on episode 6 or 7. There's a lot of show, a lot of information, a lot of conflict, which I think Dan will really like to see.
Yep.
A lot of idealistic and philosophically rooted dilemmas.
Right. And one of the conflicts that I liked, which I really don't want to put too much out there for whoever might potentially stumble upon this and listen. But there's, in one of the earlier episodes, the Shinigami, makes a proposal to him. If you do this, then I will give you this. And then a few episodes later, he has a potential, the situation arises in which he can agree with the Shinigami and say, okay, yeah, I will do this so that you can do this for me. And to see that, internal struggle and internal conflict, like, what do I do in this situation? Is this situation really worth it? To see this character sit there and think about it and talk and act upon it and do something about it was really interesting to me.
Right, and earlier today, we had sat in a local diner here, or a local cafe, and discussed, Harry Potter was on TV, and we were talking about how some of the best parts about Harry Potter aren't that Harry and all these other wizards just can walk in the front door of Hogwarts here and use every spell. Like, they just can't walk in and do everything right away.
Right.
Like, that they have classes and they practice, and I think the Hogwarts school itself is set up to where you have to be a certain age to even attempt to do things. So it's like rooted that there's kind of you need to build up to it, which is what we were discussing. He had that internal struggle. There's stuff he doesn't know about the Death Note. There's stuff he doesn't know about the Shinigami. There's stuff he doesn't quite fully have set in stone about his ideals of justice. Through the first few episodes, he's worried that he is a murderer, and then he comes to the conclusion, no, I'm not a murderer. I'm just a good, hard-working honor student that's trying to make the world a better place. Making the world great again is what he's doing with this Death Note.
Right, and going along with that, even in the first couple episodes, he says, I'm going to be the god of this new society that is, not going to do these evil, terrible things, but at the same time, it's like, well, you're making all these people die. So is it, you're going to be the only person making people die, but you're worried about other people killing other people, and you're really the only person killing people. So
Right.
to sit there and think about this is one of the shows where I've been sitting and thinking about it. Like even with the intro and the creation of Adam and the apples thing, I've been sitting here since I started watching, trying to think of, okay, what does the apple symbolize?
Mm-hmm.
How does the creation of Adam tie in? Does
Mm-hmm.
it tie in at all? Does any
Right.
of this tie in, or
Right.
is it just there for the sake of being
Yeah,
there?
just there to make it look good.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like they have, like I said, the choir, and they're doing their, I don't know if it's an acapella or whatever they're that. And I would say in the long run of the show, you see how he as a character kind of twists, and how the law enforcement twists, and how you see the conflict between, they start out saying, this is what I'm willing to do, which a lot of shows that are good at this, like Breaking Bad is another show where he's like, Walter White, he's like, oh, I'm just going to cook meth. And all of a sudden he's, blowing people up, and, selling drugs. He went from selling meth out of an RV, and now he's selling meth to people over in Europe. And he evolved, or well, I guess in some cases de-evolved, and twisted himself, and really I like that. Oftentimes it's hard to do in movies because TV shows, you have a longer season time, you have more run time in the long run of things, so you can really get deep down into the bare bones of it and kind of slowly twist your character, building up a structure around it, as opposed to, I've seen a lot of shows where they're just, kind of slightly hinting at it, and then all of a sudden he's different, or the character's different, and you're like, whoa, what inspired this change? What brought about you to all of a sudden be this as opposed to what you were? And you see that with Light, you see that with the other character, L, which is, I don't necessarily like the character, I just like his means to justice. I mean, his character's weird. You see that with the police force. You see that with a girl that falls in love with Light, that Dan has not been introduced to yet. A couple more characters that he hasn't been introduced to yet that kind of have a good twist to them. While as other animes I've watched, I'm a fan of Dragon Ball and kind of a fan of Naruto. In Dragon Ball, they seem to, and this is the typical yell, scream, and punch and kick and fight, and this guy's good, that guy's bad, we're going to fight each other. And that is not very structurally, I guess, sound as what Death Note is, which is what makes Death Note stand out. Naruto kind of has the same kind of stuff going on. They just want to fight and have good fights and scream and yell and have good fights that young boys with, they're starting to get testosterone, and they're like, yeah, let's watch this good fight. But
Right, yeah. I think now we should probably start switching gears. I don't want to stay too long onto, the contents of each show. We were talking about, justice and the theories of justice, and I think you're probably more well versed in the actual, John Rawls and all that, the actual like meat of the whole thing. So I think you've been talking a lot, but I think I think more than I would what you're talking about when it comes to this subject. And I know here and there things that I could probably pitch in every now and again, but I think it would probably be better if you were to introduce the idea.
You mentioned John Rawls, which is his veil of ignorance concept, which is probably a good place to start, really. So the veil of ignorance is where, if I can remember back a couple years to ethics course here, you basically take someone that has no knowledge of the current dilemma, right? So you take someone that has no knowledge of this death note, no knowledge of what the police are doing, what Light is doing, what anyone is doing, and you just plug them in and say, here's the information. So you say, well, this guy's got a death note, and he's ridding the world of criminals. They've been convicted, they're in jail. A lot of them are murderers, rapists, they're bad hombres, essentially. And you can give him the information of kind of what the police are doing. Their standpoint is, well, this guy that's using the death note is a murderer because he's killing all these people that are in jail. But on the other side, after they give that argument, they're gonna say, Light's gonna say, well, it's also helping all these hardworking, innocent people that aren't, I guess, morally corrupt to rape someone. They're not morally corrupt to kill someone or steal. So these hardworking people need a guy like me to write names in the death note, to kill all the criminals. To essentially what he's doing there is righting the wrongs that have occurred. Well, if you think that, which apparently Light does think, that death is worth, I don't know, you smoke pot, I guess, and you're in jail for 6 months, and well, you're a criminal. Your name's, you got a public record, so you're,
Right, yeah, and that's something that we were talking about was, well, they're already in prison, why is he going to even further lengths to kill these people?
Right, and then he could, I guess, spin the argument to more of a utilitarian kind of, well, if we kill all the criminals, then our governments aren't needed to pay for the prisons, so then all that economic, I guess, tension that is released goes back into the economy, which is then, after I've killed all these criminals, I've spread so much fear in society that the hardworking people, the honest people that have no intention of being criminals, have nothing to worry. And then those of you that are on the fringe that might, commit a little crime, you're so afraid of committing that crime that you're not going to commit it because you don't want to be killed, so you don't commit it.
So you're more wealthy and you're scared.
Yeah, essentially. So I guess Light's gonna say, you're all welcome. But on the other side, L's gonna say, well, no, motivation by fear in itself is wrong, because you're not doing something because you truly want to. You're just doing it because you truly not want to.
Right. That's another thing that we're talking about was, in this case, the negative is better than the positive.
So for instance, in this world of Death Note, if you write in the Death Note, the human that writes in the Death Note is guaranteed to neither go to heaven nor hell. So I remembered back to my behavioral economics course a long time ago. We were taught that if let's just look at $100 bill. You are negatively affected more by losing the $100 than you would be affected positively if you gained it. So the idea is, a human that gets this Death Note, with that kind of idea going around, it is better to be guaranteed to not go to hell than have a chance of going to heaven, because hell is a negative punishment, which negative altercations hurt you more than positive ones comfort you, essentially.
Right, yeah.
So the idea of, I don't have to go to hell sounds pretty good to me. I mean,
hedging your bets, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a win-win. It's either heaven or nothing, or it's hell. So you have two positives, well, I guess a positive and a neutral, and then one giant negative.
Yep. And then you just take that giant negative out of the entire mix at the cost of the two positives here.
Right.
Well, the positive and the neutral or whatever. But to go back to John Rawls, I had mentioned that the fear-mongering and how people aren't choosing to be criminals not because they morally agree or believe that being a criminal is a bad thing. They're just not being criminals because they don't want their names written in the death note, which that's essentially like, I'm not okay. I got pulled over for apparently I didn't come to a complete stop at a stop sign. Yesterday. And I guess now I'm so afraid of not coming to a complete stop at a stop sign that I'm going to have to do that out of fear of being pulled over and giving a ticket. Like, is that the motivation we all need? Like, I'm so afraid of disobeying my parents because they're going to punish me, or I shouldn't disobey my parents because I know it's wrong.
Right.
So that goes back to way back at the beginning of this video where we discussed the means to the same end. The same end is justice. One is you're not going to do it because, your parents say, you're not going to do this because if you do it, I'm going to smack you. Or is, you're not going to do this because it's not right. And that is what makes this show so appealing to me, is the very nature of society of we want justice to be because everyone wants it to be, not because everyone just wants to not everyone just not wants their name to be written in and die, essentially.
Right, yeah. Oh, and to go back, I was talking about, he was talking about he was going to be the god of the new society and all sort of stuff, but I was sitting there, I'm getting frustrated, and I'm like, well, what's the point in being a god if essentially you're just a dictator? Like, why would you take pride in that if everyone is just trembling in fear and, like, scared? Like, it's just, again, going back to, well, is that really what is good for society, is just to cower in fear and run away and just, yeah, essentially that.
Right, and that, well, you and I had spoken about what Aristotle had said. He said that punishment is actually good for the individual to correct their incorrection, I guess. So if he said that on a individual level, like you punish a child for, I don't know, being a little asshole. You punish a child for being a little asshole, right? Which most kids are, by the way. And you correct that. So at a societal level, how do you correct a society? Which that's kind of what this is. How is Light Yagami taking what Aristotle said? The punishment is good because it corrects the individual, but he's saying, Light is saying, punishment is good because it corrects the society. Which that's kind of, I would love to hear what Aristotle has to say. I'm sure he would say Light himself needs correction. But how do you correct a society? Well, a society is a culmination of individuals. So you would have to punish multiple individuals, right? To change a society.
Every individual essentially would have to be, up for the potential to be punished. Like, nobody would be able to be just looked over, or, just, we're not going to think about them. It's, if anybody, no matter how good they've been, if they do one thing wrong, then they have to be eligible, essentially, for the punishment of having your name written in the death note.
Which, in that case, if everyone has to be eligible for punishment, then everyone should be in fear of being punished. So
exactly, yeah.
So from his, again, twisted, like I mentioned earlier, twisted point of view, he might spin Aristotle's idea into saying, yeah, this is actually good. I'm punishing all of you to make all of you better. But on the other side, you have more of a deontological approach where everyone should be treated as if they matter. They all have an infinite worth. I don't want to quote Manchester here. But on the other side, it's not, the detective is not necessarily a justice always exists. It's kind of a justice and injustice coexist, and one brings about the other. So, like, injustice brings about justice, but justice may bring about injustice. I mean, we pass a new law, and we're like, oh, hey, that's justice. But then it fleshes out all this injustice that's happening. So we essentially put a new light bulb in, turn it on, and we were like, okay, we're going to illuminate the dark. And then what we find that was in the dark, we don't like it.
Right, yeah.
So which that's what I agree with. Light, on the other hand, is kind of, well, we just got to, once we get rid of injustice, all that will be is justice. It's almost like you could have one without the other, and I find that kind of hard to believe. As I mean, what is just without the idea of unjust is my dilemma that I'm having.
And another thing that we were talking about earlier, similar to this, was the idea of, well, can something be neither just nor unjust? Just kind of like, is me brushing my teeth just or unjust? Is me eating just or unjust? And then, well, I mean, you can go deeper in with, well, should what I'm eating, I guess, meat, whatever.
Is the act of existing just or unjust?
Yeah, exactly. Breathing, blinking.
Yeah. So, that would be hard. Well, if Light Yagami, if he were a real character or a real person, and I asked him, well, where is justice essentially? Is it one of the basic fundamentals of existence? Like, you have justice. Everything that is created is justice, but along the line after that creation of justice, somehow injustice came about, or was it, you can't make a coin with one side essentially,
right.
Which you can't make a coin with one side
unless it's a sphere. In which case, it's not a coin; it's a marble.
Is that just?
Is being a marble, yeah.
Yeah.
Is making marbles just? That's a good question to think
about. But I think as this show, so Dan mentioned that he doesn't like the darkness of anime, and they are often very dark. American cartoons are always campy, and they're all like the light. It's lighter. Like when you look at the art, it's lighter colors. It's sunny and happy. But these animes are a lot of times dark and gruesome and brutal and bloody and violent, and so as the show kind of twists and goes along its path, I think it gets darker, and it pushes the characters to challenge their own motives, and it pushes them to do dark things, which is, I mean, some of us, maybe not Dan and myself particularly, but some people in life get pushed into a situation where they kind of have to twist their morals and their beliefs a little bit to make it out of that situation. Essentially, they kind of have to I don't want to say do what needs to be done, because that kind of can open the door to a lot of problems, but essentially that's what essentially that they do that.
Right. And the way I see it as well is, well, if you can change, like you were saying, if you can change your mind on what's right and what's wrong, then who is to say what is just or what's unjust? Why is Light the person to say, well, that's unjust, I'm going to bring about justice, which, well, if everybody else has a different view of what just is, then how could they ever possibly bend themselves to fit into his mold of what just or unjust is?
Yeah, it's kind of like, at this point of the show, everyone's just living at the mercy of Light, which kind of sucks. I mean, for everyone else in the show, really. I mean, is that what our lives are? Are we just living at the mercy of something else? I really hope not, because you never know. Like, what if everyone was living at my mercy, and I, stub my toe on the stove, and then I say, you know what? I've had enough of this shit. Game over.
The person who put the stove in here is gonna die.
Yeah.
Because they harmed me by putting the stove right here.
It was not just the way you put that stove in, essentially. Right. Well, look at the time.
We've been going for almost 30 minutes here.
Yeah. In the long run of the show, we'll find out. Basically, well, the show kind of has a declarative in the final episode, which Dan and I won't be able to get to tomorrow because it would take a long time, so he would have to watch it on his own. In the final episode, he'll see the showrunners kind of declaratively make one side right, which is okay, I guess. I mean, it's their show, they created it, so might as well. You have to end it somehow, or else 30 years later, you have fans that are like, man, remember 30 years ago when that show was actually good, But the ending is good. I really liked it. Overall, I would say if you haven't watched this, I would recommend watching it, especially if you have if you've taken philosophy courses, if you talked about justice, if you're, even if you're religious and you read the Bible or whatever, and you often think about what is good and what is right, what is fair, what is justice, what do people deserve, how to go about getting what people deserve, then this show kind of it really, if you follow it well, it does a pretty good job at delving into those things. It really doesn't get bigger than what it actually is. It spins the entire show around the idea of justice. It doesn't evolve and magically one episode is like, oh hey, we're no longer about this topic, we're about this topic now. No, it's all the same, and it twists the characters. It's about the character development. It's about the development of the Death Note itself, about the interaction of the Shinigami and the human using the Death Note. It's about the basically the combatants of my ideals of justice versus your ideals of justice, and my ideals are going to beat you, and it's that throughout the whole show.
Yep. And I think this show, from the little bit of it that I've seen, has been a really good show to use examples and to refer to when you're talking about justice and injustice and good and bad, because it focuses so heavily on that right from the very beginning. Right from the beginning of the show is when they plant the seeds of what's gonna happen when it comes to what's just and what's unjust, good or bad, so on and so forth. And I think that's why we were able to sit here and talk about it. And I feel like we could sit here and talk about it for hours if we needed to, but we just don't want to be able, or Alex, I suppose, because I haven't seen as much as him, he doesn't want to give any more away of the show than he already has.
Oh, it's a great show, and I do not want to spoil it. Because some moments you'll be shocked, some moments you'll be kind of questioning, and then Dan has already seen. So of course, he and I are dumbasses, right? And
no kidding.
And there's one moment like he was like, "What's going on?" And then the next scene they take time to explain to you what just happened, and he was like, "Wow, it's a good thing they explained it to such a dumbass like me." so they do a pretty good job at thoroughly. I mean, would you rather watch a Michael Bay, hundreds of $1 million movie where it's just explosions, or would you rather watch a small film like Napoleon Dynamite? Would you rather see some big extravagant thing not really well developed, or a small little idea that's very well developed and very well thought out and delivered very well?
Right, rather than spreading yourself thin and trying to do all these different things, focus on one thing and get really good at it.
Yeah. And I that's what I believe this show does. One of my favorite animes, one of my favorite cartoons, up there with Dragon Ball, Ed, Edd n Eddy. I did like Courage the Cowardly Dog. It was creepy, but I liked it. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy were creepy, and I liked it. Tom and Jerry. Well, I guess Family Guy, Futurama, and South Park are also cartoons, technically.
By definition.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I'm, we could spend hours talking about Death Note and how it relates to different theories of justice. I mean, we didn't even mention Henry David Thoreau. We mentioned deontology. We didn't mention, we mentioned some utilitarians. Not very many of them, though. There's different branches of utilitarianism and all that stuff. But I mean, at that point, we're just splitting hairs here. I mean, come on. So, I've spun the yarn and anchored this show today. So, So Dan will. I'll be drinking the beer next time. Bringing some moisture back to my whistle here, and Dan will be the one spinning the yarn.
You're just so good at this. That's the thing.
Yeah. Yep. Well, you know what they say: keep the beers cold and
market zero.
Market zero.